What's up, model makers? It is Friday, June the 10th, which is really not significant, other than for the fact that it is about 11 months, almost a full year, since I started the Accurate Miniatures 1/48 scale b-25b project. And I'm pretty much in a state of disbelief at the moment because I'm actually sitting here looking at it. It's done. But unfortunately, this is not the episode where I'm going to show you. I thought I was done talking about it in episode 8, but somehow since then I managed to come up with another 45 minutes worth of stuff to talk about, which is probably as much a result of my own verbosity as anything important about the kit. But nonetheless, here's some stuff. Check it out. Okay, time for another update because I've gotten past the next stage of the weathering on the wings and the fuselage both. But I'm just going to give you a quick view of the wing here. You can see that I've done lots of oil blending work here, both in large areas like over here, and then in small detail areas like around the fuel caps. I went a little bit dramatic on purpose because you know, of the tonal crush issue that you get with you know, a single color like olive drab. So the fuel stains are a little heavy. Somebody's going to call me on these vent stains right here. These are not exhaust. They are just a kind of a vent. And they do pick up a little bit of staining, although you don't see it on most pictures. But I decided that I liked the look of it and wanted to include it. I also did some weathering on the de-icing boots to give them a more faded look on the top surface. Now, what did I use for all of that? The colors that I used, for the most part, you can see I've just got them out here on my little cardboard palette. I used some raw umber, some black, some olive green. I didn't end up using this green. Used a little bit of raw sienna and transparent white. The most important ones were the transparent white, the olive, and the burnt umber, and I'll explain where I used each of those. The olive, obviously, I used just to create some green tone variation, which you can see right there in that area. The transparent white is a really indispensable thing. I learned a trick I learned from Matt McDougall. It's for doing fading, and it works really well. I use things like the raw umber for stuff like the fuel stains. Now, let me show you specifically what I'm using is the Windsor Newton, and you don't have to, but these are really good, and they'll last you for a long time. But this is the transparent white, and this is the olive color, and I just picked this up. This is a little bit different. If you'll notice, it says that it's an alkyd fast-drying oil color. What the alkyd means is that that's basically the binder that's in there. That's the stuff that makes it nice and gooey. And alkyd is basically the binder that's used in most modern enamels, as opposed to a linseed oil binder that's used in traditional oil paints like you've got right here. Now, the difference is, and you can really see this, is when they say fast drying, this stuff does dry fast, almost too fast in some cases. You know, you can't leave it there forever before you work it like you can with some of these oils. And you can really kind of see the difference. If you look here where I've put this little pile of the olive, there's hardly any oil or anything soaked into the cardboard around it. But then if you look right next to it, where I've put that patch of transparent white, you can see all that linseed oil that has soaked into the cardboard. And this is something that you really want to do. I finally started doing that after reading Rinaldi's book, where he talks about how soaking the oil into the cardboard for about half an hour before you use it really reduces the overall drying time, and that's a good thing. Now, how do I apply it? So what I'm using is just a small brush, like a 0 or a number 1, to just put it in specific areas. And then I use different brushes for blending, and I try to do the blending dry as much as possible. But how well your blending goes really seems to be dependent on the kind of brush you use. And you want something that's got soft, flexible bristles. That's just something that I've learned. I'm not saying that like I'm an expert, because I'm not. But these are some inexpensive red sable brushes that I picked up. And they're nice and soft, and that's what you really want. This one is actually even a little bit stiff going in this direction, but what I found I could use it for to do streaking, for example, was using the side of it, and it worked really well. I also have been using this one quite a bit. It's even a little bit softer and more flexible. And then in some cases, I'm even using this gigantic thing. It just, it's just one of those things where I can't really say, use this specific brush for this specific situation, because it's just one of those things where you just have to sort of work out your own technique, and you'll know it when you hit it. So what's happening now is I'm just letting those parts get a nice, good cure for a few days before I do the next thing, which is to put a nice coat of Aqua Gloss on all of it. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I just want to get something on there to really seal and protect all of those layers of paint that I've worked so hard on. And Aqua Gloss is really rock hard, and it goes down easy, and it's a good choice for that, in my opinion. So that will give me peace of mind when I go into the assembly phase and I'm wrestling the wings onto the fuselage and so forth, and I'm doing a lot of handling. I'm going to want to know that nothing's going to get disturbed. So I think Aqua Gloss will be a good choice for that. And then once that's all dried, then I will obviously come back and put on a nice coat of matte varnish to ungloss it. So that'll basically be about the last step. There'll be a few weathering tweaks after that last layer of gloss, I'm sure, but you guys probably are not going to see this thing again until it's finished, because I'm that close. And I have been doing a lot of work on detail parts over the last couple of days while I waited for everything to dry, so I'll tell you a little bit about that. So these wheels, look at how beautiful they are. And I'm not talking about my paint work, I'm talking about the detail. These are Def model wheels, and all of their wheels are really fantastic. One problem I did have with these was that the masks didn't fit worth a damn. They were out of round and not the right size. And what I ended up doing, which might not have been the best choice, I don't know, I went ahead and put them on there and then used a really sharp knife tip to trim around using the outline of the wheel, which worked okay for the most part, except on this rim. This is the first time I've seen something from Def where they didn't get the molding quite right. You can't really see it, but if you were to look really close at this, maybe you'll see it. That doesn't look so great, and part of it is because there's texture in the molding there, and they did not get a good hard separation with the rim and the tire on that one. So anyway, my trimming job was okay, but it just didn't really work as well as I wanted it to. Didn't get me the hard edge that I was after. So I came back with a really tiny brush and one of my favorite things, which is this Windsor Newton Indian ink. Now this stuff is super useful. To do this little fix here, what I did is I used it straight out of the bottle, but with a brush that was dampened with just alcohol thinners. And it's nice because that makes it flow really well into a place like the, canyon that's between there, between the rim and the tire. And you can kind of see the evidence where it's the hard black against the 20% white, or the 80% black, I should say, that I used to paint the overall tire. But that enabled me to get a nice tight line around there. And where I did have a couple of small goobers from my clumsiness, that's where the using this ink really shines, because I can just take a brush or the tip of a toothpick that's been moistened with alcohol and just very easily come in and kind of scrub on that to remove any stray marks without disturbing the acrylic paint that's underneath it. So it's really nice. Now, where I also use it is then I take the same stuff that I used to make that fix, and I mix it with some alcohol thinners at a really high ratio, like 90 or 80%. And now I use that as a wash and a stain for things like these gear doors, where I want to darken the aluminum. I also want to take advantage of the way that the alcohol thinner creates random tide marks and things, and gives a really natural effect. So that's what's going on there. That's actually 2 applications of the stain on those parts, because the first one didn't it just wasn't dense enough for my taste. So just went back, hit it again, and got a nice looking wash there that leaves those looking grimy, but helps pick up the detail. I also used it here on the crew access doors. Now with these are the Pavla parts that came with the seats and so forth, and they're okay. They're better than the parts that came with the kit, because they don't have giant ejector pin marks right in the middle of these 2 areas where it would be 100% impossible to clean them out. So and I decided to try a little bit of an experiment and see what I could get away with. I went ahead and sprayed some silver on these, since I had some in the airbrush anyway. And then I hit it with hairspray, and I mean real hairspray this time. I've been using MIG's chipping fluid, which works fine, but I've been wanting to try hairspray. So I did that, and then sprayed it with interior green and did some chipping. And not going to be highly visible, but I like the worn effect that I got on this crew access ladder, which is definitely going to see that kind of wear and tear. And then I came back with some of my ink wash to kind of darken it up and deepen the shadows a little bit. So I think those look okay. Then came landing gear time, which is typically something that I hate, but things went reasonably well with these. The first thing that I had to do, and then I've had to do this with every def model wheel that I've used, and I don't know what the deal is, but the holes always seem to be a bit undersized. So first thing I did was drill those out, and then they also were not deep enough, so I clipped the ends of the axle stubs off to make that work. Then I did something that I've thought about doing before, but never had a good opportunity to try, and that is I wrapped the lower leg of the strut there with bare metal foil to get that, to get a true shiny metal appearance. And hopefully the camera picks that up. But cameras just don't pick up those nuances of metallic finishes very well. But I think it sets off nicely with the Vallejo silver that I used for the gear itself. And obviously that's a wash of my same ink that I put on there. I also did some detail wiring. You can see that is some of my 10 thousandths artist silver wire that I used for those hydraulic lines. And then also, a little tougher to see, I used lead wire to create the brake line that comes out from the end of the axle and kind of wraps around there. And I think that worked pretty cool. One thing that's worth mentioning that I used for, not the first time, but this will be the first time to talk about it, is this little gizmo, which I have just totally fallen in love with. And this is the glue looper. Now, I'd heard of these things and I'd been skeptical of them because I'm like, I don't need to spend money on little tiny pieces of wire and toothpicks and so forth. But Ken Abrams, who's a guy that I always listen to because he's a badass, was talking these up. And so I decided to just try them out. They're $12 and I thought, why not? You get a kit of them that includes 2 of each of 3 sizes. That's a good way to break some small parts. Anyway, you get a small, medium, and large. And they say that they only work with thin cyanoacrylate, but I use this standard Loctite professional super glue. Now, of course, you got to get the professional super glue, right? At any rate, it's kind of what I would consider a medium thick, and it works fine. All you have to do is dip the loop into a little pool of it, and you get a nice little drop of it, inside the loop. And that's cool enough, but what really for me the magic is having this knife handle as the holder, because it gives me that pencil-like control that I never had before with a floppy piece of wire, and so much better. My glue placement game has just improved 1,000-fold by using these things. I'm wasting less glue, getting less glue where I don't want it. I really, really love this tool. If you notice, it's kind of black on the end, and that's because the way you clean them out is by just flashing a little bit of a flame on it. And you'd be amazed at how flammable super glue residue is. The stuff goes up instantly. And so then you just wipe the ashes off and go on about your business. So very cool tool. Can't recommend that enough. The other thing you may notice, I forgot to mention, I did use for the black wash on these tires, I used the Tamiya enamel wash on those. And the reason I did that is because I didn't want as much staining on the wheels. I wanted I wanted a collection of pigment down in the low spots, and I still wanted to keep the high spots a little shinier. So anyway, that's just a purely subjective choice on my part. Anyway, I think that that about covers it. I think one thing I was thinking about mentioning when I thought about what all to say in this segment was, again, I'm not trying to tell anybody how to do their business, but one thing I've noticed is with oftentimes with detail wiring, that when I look at it, pictures of it, it looks like a piece of wire, because it still has the bends in it from, coming off of the roll, like this, for example. And you can, this is lead wire, and you can roll it. You can straighten it to a certain extent with your fingers, but especially with a soft wire like that, it still looks like a piece of wire. So what I always try to do for hydraulic lines and things that really need to have that industrial look of straight tubing like that is I straighten the wire first. I either roll it like I do with the lead wire, or like with this silver artistic wire, which doesn't roll very well for whatever reason, I stretch it. So what I do is I just take a loop of it about 1 foot long and tie it to something that won't budge, and then grab the other end of it with a pair of pliers and just pull it until it stretches and breaks. And that straightens it out perfectly. Super easy technique for doing that. And then I've got, 1 foot of really nice straight wire that used to look like that for all of my detail work. So anyway, just a little thing that might help you if you're going to try and tackle some of this stuff. Okay, as you can see, I am busy gluing the wings on the Mitchell. And that's been pretty straightforward, but I thought that there were a couple of things that were worth talking about. The fitment is not bad. you can see that it's got this recess that the wing plugs into. But there's a little bit of an issue to look out for with these spars. I mean, they're really flimsy, and that is what it is. But the problem is that they don't end up locating very precisely when you assemble the fuselage and put this piece in there. And you'd think that that would not be too big of a deal given the size of the locating holes in the wing itself, which I'll show you, because there's quite a bit of slop there. I mean, when you look at the comparison between the size of the slot and the spar, there's quite a bit of lateral slop. But look at how close the top edge of the slot is to the upper wing surface on the front and the back. And that's where, you can run into a little bit of an issue, because this bit of plastic right here that's between the top edge of the slot and the top edge of the wing surface has to fit into this space right here at the top edge of the spar. Hopefully that makes sense. And this is just, again, poor engineering. The slot that the spars go through on the fuselage itself run all the way up to the top of that recess. I think you can see what I'm talking about in there when I zoom in. So as you can see, I had to clean some material off the top edge of the spar in order to let the wing sit low enough that it would plug into the socket the way that it's supposed to. Not a big deal, just basic problem solving. This is also, however, a good point to talk about a little bit of glue strategy. Now, probably like most of you guys, I do about 90% of my work with Tamiya Extra Thin, which is just fantastic stuff. The only thing I ever use other than that is super glue for detail parts that are not styrene, and occasionally some 5-minute epoxy. But there are situations where I don't feel totally comfortable with depending 100% on Extra Thin, because as you probably know, the stuff doesn't allow you to apply it and then assemble the parts very effectively, because it evaporates so quickly. And so sometimes you need something that will just sit there and give you a little bit of working time. And occasionally I will use old school Testor's tube glue for that. But what I also like is the other Tamiya cement. Some people call this stuff limonene because it smells real citrusy, and it's got this orange color to it. I don't know, but anyway, this stuff works pretty good for that. Let me see if I can get the lid to come off here. It's usually glued itself on there. But if you look, the viscosity of this stuff is substantially thicker than Tamiya Extra Thin. And that can really work in your favor in a situation like this wing joint, because you've got a large surface area there that is going to need some glue on it to provide really good strength down there in that airfoil shaped socket. I am going to scrape the paint off of that, by the way, before I do this. But the thing is I don't want to be flooding a bunch of Tamiya Extra Thin in there around this edge here, because obviously the more of that I do, the greater chance I stand of screwing up all my paint work in that area. So this stuff is perfect for that, because I can apply it to the area and on these spars, and it's not going to just evaporate on me while I do the rest of the assembly. And then I can follow that up with just a tiny bit of very carefully applied extra thin right in the joint, and I'm pretty much good to go. So just something to think about. I believe that that's part of craftsmanship, is always looking at your strategy ahead of time, and trying to predict what's going to happen and come up with the most effective way to get the job done. All right, there you go. Okay, so this wing is on, and I just kind of felt compelled to say something else because as I was sitting here working, I was thinking, I bet some of these guys are freaking out that I was even suggesting applying extra thin with this stuff already painted. Because, you're thinking, but isn't that going to destroy the paint? And the answer is not if you do it correctly. And what I mean is I'm taking most of the extra thin off of the little brush. Pretend that this is the little brush. I'm taking most of it off by wiping it off on the edge of the jar, obviously. And then I'm applying it only in a point and letting it do its thing to wick into the joint. I've seen some things in videos lately where people are taking extra thin and brushing it along the entire length of the joint, and that's just simply not necessary. The magic of extra thin is the capillary action that lets it flow into the joint. So all you have to do is just touch it. And if you're precise and you get it right there in the corner, you shouldn't have too much of an issue. The other thing about extra thin, I wish I could just say shut up compressor like Matt McDougall and it would obey me, but I'm just not that cool. Anyway, the thing about extra thin is that a lot of times people will freak out when they get this stuff on the surface of something that they don't want it to be on. And then they'll start trying to wipe it off, and that is the last thing you want to do. That's a guarantee, basically, that you're going to have create a surface defect. This stuff evaporates super fast, so if you get it on a surface that you don't want it to be on, just give it a second. You can even blow on it to help it evaporate faster. And generally, it's going to just disappear without leaving any issue whatsoever. Obviously, you got to be careful. You don't want to get it. You don't want to be sticking your brush in places where you don't want it and just use that as an excuse to be sloppy in your placement, especially with clear parts. You just have to trust me on this, that extra thin is not as dangerous as some people think it is. You just have to be smart in how you apply it. Okay, now, if you're looking at this image, you should be wondering, why in the hell are there giant pieces of masking tape around the windshield of the Mitchell? So, look, you guys know that I share my triumphs and my trials equally because, I just don't give a shit, and because this is how we all learn. Unfortunately, sometimes the greatest knowledge is gained from the toughest lessons. So, let me explain some things. My basic strategy for putting an aircraft canopy in place is, first of all, I do all the masking before I install the canopy. Just much easier to manipulate it that way. The second thing is that this right here is my favorite canopy glue. I prefer an actual solvent weld with plastic whenever possible, and I like my shit to be strong. So I believe that extra thin is the best solution, but it carries some risks, and that's what this is about. Extra thin is not going to fog your canopy in the way that a cyanoacrylate glue will or possibly can. But if you misplace it, then you can have a problem, obviously, because it melts plastic. So what I always say is that I qualify my statement that extra thin is the best canopy glue as long as you apply it correctly. And what I mean by correctly is in very small amounts at very precise locations. So, you use the brush or even a smaller brush and get right into the joint. Now, doing it this way has some advantages. It lets you get all your masking done beforehand, and it allows you to then address any joining issues between the canopy and the rest of the airframe. And ideally, you can make your canopy, flawlessly joined with the fuselage. Now, it has some disadvantages. One being that any issues you might have are going to be hidden by the masks. Like, for example, when I took all the masks off of this, I discovered that in spite of having the holes in the fuselage plugged up, I had 5 months worth of construction shavings inside the office here. And I had to get out the vacuum cleaner. I put a nylon stocking on the end of the vacuum cleaner nozzle and stuck it up against the crew entry hatch on the bottom here, and it sucked all of that trash out, so no harm, no foul. But if I hadn't had that hatch opening, I wouldn't have been able to do that. It would have been a disaster. I mean, I would have had to have cut this canopy off because it was that bad. So there are some disadvantages to doing it that way. Also, if you use extra thin, your canopy is on there very firmly. And getting it back off of there, should you need to, is going to be difficult. Whereas if you used a PVA glue or even epoxy, you could just pretty much pop that canopy right back off because it's not welded on there. So there are advantages and disadvantages. Now, there are also certain situations that create caveats. And this right here is one of them. Now, most of the time, your canopy masks fit in between the canopy frames. They're totally isolated from the edge that you're going to be applying your cement to, or your glue, whatever it is. So you don't have to worry about any cement seeping under the edge of the tape. Because trust me, extra thin will go places that paint will not. Well, I wasn't thinking about that. And as you can see, on this front portion of the Mitchell's windshield, the mask goes full bleed all the way to the edge where it meets the fuselage. There is no frame down there. So, I had a situation that I wasn't really thinking about when I wicked extra thin into that joint. And the truth is, I didn't even really need to. I should have just avoided that to start with because there was enough strength from the extra thin being back here and back here. I didn't need to put any up here. But the thing that got me was that the mask had a split in it right here so that it would conform to the curvature. And that split is what did it to me, as you'll see right here. I'm going to pull this masking off so I can show you the other side, and you can see the remnants of my polishing there. But once I get this tape off of here, you'll be able to see the exact situation, because I have the same mark on both sides. Okay, hopefully you can see it when I zoom in there. Yep, there it is. See right here, that little line? I've been looking at this and stewing on it for days thinking, is that a crack? Is it a scratch? Why is it the same on both sides? And finally, after just thinking about it long enough, I realized what had happened. That is where the split in the tape allowed the extra thin to wick in there just enough to melt a little bitty line in the surface of that canopy. And so here I am polishing it out. And what I did is I just gradually worked it. It was a bitch to sand it out. I used a pretty rough stick. I used this 240 grit sanding stick until I could no longer see any evidence of the defect. And then I just started working my way through these micro mesh sanding pads. And these are nice because they're firm enough that they hold their shape. And so you can kind of work on an edge like this, which is what I needed to be able to do to handle that without, getting into the surrounding paint. And then as a final step, I just very carefully used my Proxxon with its polishing wheel and a little bit of Novus number 2 and got it all smoothed out. So I think it's in pretty good shape. You know, definitely not something I'm happy about, but I'm glad that I was able to resolve it for the most part. One word about these sanding pads while I'm talking about them and talking about grits and so forth. You may have noticed this one says 3200. I'm going to talk about this in another video just about sanding materials, but these create a lot of confusion because you've got 3200 and they go all the way up to 12,000, and if you're like me, you've wondered how the heck does that relate to normal sanding paper, because you've got like this block right here is a 320 grit block, and it looks, to my eyeballs, it looks about the same as this 3200. And for a while I thought it was just that they were adding a 0. Well, the fact is that if you're using micro mesh polishing materials, their grit scale bears no relationship whatsoever to the standard grit scales that are out there, which are you know, made by there's like a society, an engineering society that's determined those that have been in use for decades. But for whatever reason, Micromesh decided to just make their own. So just something to be aware of. Lots of little lessons learned in this little part of the adventure. So hopefully you guys won't make the same mistakes. Okay, so there you go. I thought I would just show you guys what can be achieved with a little bit of polishing. I know this is the sort of thing that is terrifying for most of us, but there's really no need to panic in a situation like this. You know, even if that means that you just have to sit on it for a few days until you figure out what's going on and come up with a good solution. But the truth is that there's nothing that can't be fixed at any stage of the game. It's just a question of how deep you want to go. You know, how much do you trust your skills, and you know, what are you willing to take on? And I find that when I just go ahead and do it, that not only do I feel much better about my skills afterwards, but I don't have to sit there and look at that blemish from now on. And that's that's kind of been the story with this project. But at any rate, you know, I think the fundamental thing here is that even when you've got a good methodology, and I like extra thin, and I like using it on canopies, and I'll continue to do that, but even when you've got a good methodology, sometimes situations will present themselves that will trip you up, and something like this will happen. And I guess that part of what defines your skills is how well you manage to overcome that. Okay, so every time I think I'm done talking about this silly project, there's something else to talk about. And I would be remiss if I didn't discuss this dorsal turret just a little bit, which doesn't seem to want to, camera doesn't seem to want to focus on. But there's a couple of things. First is the barrels, the gun barrels. I used the beautiful 1/48 barrels from Master, and they're incredible. They are 2 pieces, so you get the barrel and the cooling jacket, and you just have to slide the 2 parts together. Now, I had a little bit of trouble with that because there were a few burrs on the inside of the cooling jacket, but I just chased the inside of it with a drill bit, and it was no big deal. Now, to explain how those fit on, I'm going to move over to the instruction sheet because I have things to talk about there anyway. But a word about painting the plexiglass dome on this thing. It's pretty difficult to find good photos of it, and there are some photos that would lead you to believe that it has metal framing, and in later versions of this turret it did, and even some of them were modified in the field by air crew, or ground crew rather. But the thing that I decided to do is this turret dome was actually built from sections of molded plexiglass. and then glued together or bolted together or whatever. And the only detail that you really get, this is one thing Accurate Miniatures did that was kind of in our behalf, is they molded some lines, you can see them around the inside, that sort of are supposed to represent that joint. And that made it pretty easy for me to sort of paint in there with some clear, flat acrylic varnish to kind of represent that joint. So that's why that looks the way it did. It's not that I just forgot to paint it. So anyway, let's move over to the instruction sheet so I can talk about the construction issues here. Now, if you guys recall, what I decided to do initially was to put the turret in last rather than before joining the fuselage halves like they tell you to. The reason that they do that is because they've made it, allegedly, so that the turret will spin and the guns will elevate, which, look, as far as I'm concerned, is just silliness. If I wanted a b-25 model that had a working turret, I'd haul my ass down to Toys R Us and buy a plastic toy that would do it. Okay, I don't need that on a scale model. So what I did is I clipped off this nub sticking out right here, kind of like that, so that it would be able, so that I could insert the whole subassembly through the hole in the top of the fuselage. That was fine, but there's two issues. One is I didn't do a good job of checking the fit of the stub on the bottom here that is supposed to plug into the socket on the cockpit floor. And I think it was a little bit too tight because it wouldn't go all the way down in there, and I ended up removing most of that stub on the bottom of the shaft there. But the real issue was that even with it in place, there was a noticeable gap between the bottom edge of the turret dome right here and the edge of the opening in the fuselage, and that was just unacceptable. And so what I did to fix that, and this was a real pain in my ass because I already had the guns installed and everything, was I removed most of this material right here. Basically that entire ledge right there, I cut it off by making a cut from this direction with my razor saw just underneath that ledge, and then making a perpendicular cut like that to just remove the rest of that because it was glued onto this thing right here. And so what that ended up leaving me with was a ledge that looks kind of like this, with a little bit of a step in it right here for the bottom edge of the turret dome to sit on. And I did the same thing here by removing most of this material on this nub and just leaving this tiny little ledge right there. And that actually was an improvement because that sort of helped the turret dome center itself, which before there was nothing to help you do that. You just had to eyeball it to make the edge of the dome concentric with the edge of this feature right here. So that was kind of better, and that allowed the dome to sit maybe a millimeter further down into the fuselage, and that took care of that gap. So, you know, problem solved there. Oh, now going back to the gun barrels, what you do to install those is you chop off the kit barrels right here and then drill a hole in the end of that stub and insert the assembled barrel and super glue it in place, which isn't really as hard as it sounds. It's kind of a hassle. It's a little bit difficult to get them straight. Mine certainly are not perfectly straight, but with everything that's going on there, it's, you know, pretty difficult to tell unless you're eyeballing it through a magnifying glass and you've got a ruler. So hopefully it all looks pretty good. I'm not 100% happy with it, but it's definitely, having those barrels on there is definitely better than the kit parts. So definitely something to consider. Master barrels are always, in my opinion, a worthy addition to your project. Okay, so there you go. Putting the turret in was pretty much the last thing that I felt like I needed to even talk about. After that, it was fairly straightforward. I added the crew doors to the belly hatches. I substituted some 25 thousandths OD stainless steel tubing for the antenna masts because the ones with the kit were just really fragile. They have an airfoil shape to them, which is probably more correct, but they were just way too flimsy. So I substituted those, added some easy line for an antenna, stuck the pitot tube in, screwed up the mounting of the tail glass with the broomsticks in it. And so this Doolittle Raider is not going to have broomsticks. I know that's a key part of the legend of the Doolittle Raiders, that he ordered the planes to put sawed-off broomsticks painted black, sticking out of the tail to make any encroaching Japanese fighters think that there were actually guns back there. But I got a little too much glue on the inside of that piece of glass, and so that's not happening, and I feel okay about it. I know some of the aircraft had the broomsticks. I don't know for certain that Doolittle's did. I think it probably might have, but this one's not going to have it, and that's just too bad. I'm just at that point. I'm just so glad to be done. It hasn't even really soaked in yet that I am finished, but I hope that you will tune back in when I do the final presentation. So if you do, I'll see you then. As always, I appreciate you watching. Much love.